Vanessa Cross walked into that anniversary dinner like she owned it. She didn't knock, she didn't hesitate. She pressed both palms flat against the mahogany doors of Cassian Moretti's private dining room, shoved them open with the kind of confidence that comes from having nothing left to lose or everything to gain, and stood there in a red dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, one hand resting deliberately over her stomach. Elena Moretti looked up from the candlelit table where she had been waiting for 2 hours. The ultrasound image was still tucked inside her purse. She had planned everything perfectly. The dress, the wine she wouldn't drink, the careful, trembling smile she'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror before coming downstairs. After 14 years of marriage, 3 of which had nearly broken her completely, she was going to tell her husband tonight that they were going to have a baby. Instead, Vanessa Cross looked directly at Elena, not at Cassian, not at the room, just at Elena, and said the 4 words that changed everything. "I'm carrying his child. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you feel something while listening today, press like. It costs nothing, but it means everything to creators like me. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand the night that destroyed the Moretti family, you first have to understand the world Cassian built, the woman who made it possible, and the slow, quiet way love can unravel before anyone thinks to save it. Cassian Moretti did not become the most feared man in the city by accident. He became it one decision at a time, the way a man builds a wall. Brick by brick, year by year, until the structure around him is so thick and so high that even the people who love him can't always find the door. He had grown up in the kind of neighborhood where ambition was either your salvation or your death sentence, and he had always been just reckless enough, just smart enough, to make it the former. By 22, he was running collections for the DeLuca family. By 26, he had broken from them entirely, taking 12 loyal men and a set of contacts that older, slower bosses had spent decades cultivating. By 30, he was Cassian Moretti, and the name meant something. It meant don't touch what's his. It meant pay what you owe. It meant the city worked the way the city was supposed to work, and if it didn't, someone had a very uncomfortable conversation with men in very expensive suits, and then it did. Elena had been there before any of it. She met Cassian when he was still Angelo Moretti's errand boy with scuffed shoes and too much pride for his own good. She had been 20 years old, studying architecture at night and working the front desk of a hotel during the day, and he had walked in looking for someone who could help him draft a legal letter without asking too many questions. Her roommate's cousin knew someone. That someone was Elena. She remembered thinking he was too intense, too focused, the kind of man who made eye contact like it was a negotiation. She also remembered that he had tipped her $40 for 40 minutes of work, looked her directly in the eye, and said, "You're smarter than this job." Nobody had ever said that to her before. 3 months later, they were inseparable. 3 years after that, they were married in a small ceremony. 20 people, no flowers. Elena hadn't chosen herself, and a cake with too much frosting because Cassian had personally argued with the baker about the ratios. Elena had laughed so hard during the tasting that she'd cried. That was the man she married, not the boss, not the syndicate, the man who argued about frosting ratios and meant it as an act of love. The empire came later, and with it, slowly, invisibly, came the distance. It wasn't dramatic at first. Cassian didn't come home one day a stranger. It was more like fog. Weeks where he was physically present but mentally somewhere else. Dinners where his phone buzzed and he glanced down at it and something shifted behind his eyes. Years of watching him carry weights she wasn't allowed to help lift. Elena understood the life. She had chosen it with open eyes, or at least she told herself she had. She managed the household, the appearances, the charitable donations that kept the Moretti name clean in daylight hours. She learned which questions to ask and which to leave alone. She became, without ever being formally appointed, the quiet axis around which Cassian's world rotated. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was exactly how quiet she had become in the process. She had stopped bringing up the architecture degree she'd abandoned. She had stopped mentioning the studio space she'd once dreamed about. She had stopped pushing back when Cassian canceled plans, or came home at 3 in the morning, or needed her to smile at men she didn't trust at dinners she didn't want to attend. She told herself it was partnership, that sacrifice was love's other name. By the time she understood that she'd been slowly disappearing from her own life, she had been Mrs. Moretti for 11 years. The pregnancy was unexpected. She and Cassian had talked about children years ago, had tried without saying they were trying, and then stopped talking about it entirely when the trying produced nothing and the silence around it became too heavy to carry. Elena had made her peace with it, or thought she had. When the test came back positive, she sat on the bathroom floor for 45 minutes with her back against the cold tile and her hands shaking so badly she had to take 3 photos before she could read the result clearly. Then she cried. Not because she was sad, because she understood, in the way you understand things when they arrive without warning, that this was her chance. Not just to become a mother, but to become someone again. To stop being the background of Cassian Moretti's life and become, finally, the center of something. She spent 3 weeks planning how to tell him. She chose their anniversary because it was the last night she still believed, truly believed, that if she gave him something real, something irreplaceable, he would remember who they were before the empire swallowed them whole. She made the reservation at the private dining room they'd used for their 5th anniversary. She told the kitchen what he liked. She wore the green dress he'd told her once, years ago, that made her look like herself. She was 40 minutes early. He was 2 hours late. She sat at that table and watched the candles burn down and checked her phone and told herself traffic was bad, that there was a situation, that he would call. She ordered water and then a bread basket, and then nothing else because she was pregnant and the smell of the kitchen was making her vaguely nauseous, and she wanted to be sharp when he arrived, clear, ready. She did not let herself cry at the table. That was one rule she had for herself. Not at the table. Cassian finally pushed through the door at 8:47, and Elena looked up with the smile she had been practicing, the real one that cost her something to produce. And then she saw his face. He looked like a man who had just received news he didn't know how to survive. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, and his voice was off. "Careful in the wrong places. There was something at the office. You couldn't have called." "I know." He sat down across from her. He looked at the half-burned candles and the untouched place setting beside her and the bread basket she'd barely touched, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. "Cassian." She put her hands on the table, flat, open. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. Too fast. It was work." "Don't." She said it quietly, but she meant it. "Don't do that tonight. I asked you to give me tonight." He met her eyes. For a moment, just one, she thought he was going to tell her something true. Then his phone buzzed on the table, and he looked down at it, and the moment collapsed. "I have to take this." "No," she said. "You don't." He took it anyway. She listened to him murmur into the phone, "Yes, I understand. Handle it. I'll be there." And she looked at the ultrasound image inside her purse, and she thought, not for the first time, "I am married to a man who is not here." He came back to the table with the kind of apology that didn't ask for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," he said. "I have to go." "Cassian, I'll make it up to you." He always said that. He almost always meant it. That was the brutal part. He wasn't a man who didn't care. He was a man who cared about too many things and had never learned how to rank them correctly, and by the time he understood that his marriage should have been first, he had already been choosing wrong for years. She didn't tell him about the baby. She sat at that table alone for another 20 minutes, paid the bill, and went home. In the room where Cassian kept his private office, a woman named Vanessa Cross was waiting. Vanessa had been his executive secretary for 3 years. She was efficient, discreet, and ambitious in the particular way of people who grew up watching others get things they felt entitled to themselves. She had started as an assistant to Cassian's chief financial officer, moved laterally through the organization twice, and landed in the role of Cassian's secretary by being, simply, better at anticipating what he needed than anyone else on staff. She also knew where everybody was buried. Metaphorically. Mostly. What had happened between her and Cassian was not a love story. Both of them understood that. It was 6 weeks during the worst period of the Moretti marriage. A stretch of months after a business crisis had nearly destroyed the organization, when Cassian had been drinking too much and sleeping too little, and Elena had retreated somewhere inside herself that he couldn't reach. It was the kind of mistake that happens when loneliness and proximity and poor judgment arrive in the same room at the same time. He had ended it clearly, cleanly, or so he believed. Vanessa had said she understood. She had not said she was pregnant. That conversation she had been saving. When Cassian walked into his private office that night, late, wired, carrying the weight of a dozen crises, Vanessa was sitting in the chair across from his desk. She was wearing black. Her hands were folded in her lap with a stillness that was not calm, but controlled. "We need to talk," she said. Cassian stopped in the doorway. Something about the way she was sitting, too composed, too ready, sent a signal to the back of his brain that his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. "It's late, Vanessa." "I know it is. Sit down." He didn't. "What is this?" She reached into the folder on her lap and placed a piece of paper on his desk. He walked forward and looked at it. A medical form. His eyes snagged on a date, a name, a phrase. Estimated gestational age, 11 weeks. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. "No," he said. It came out not as denial, but as the only word he had. "Yes," Vanessa said. "You said—" He stopped, recalibrated. "You told me—" "I told you I was fine." She looked at him steadily. "I was wrong." He sat down then, not because he chose to, because his legs decided independently that this was the appropriate moment. "Cassian," her voice was quieter now. The control was still there, but underneath it was something raw, something that might have been fear. "I'm not here to destroy your marriage." "Then what are you here to do?" "I'm here," she said carefully, "because you deserve to know, and because your child deserves to exist without being a secret." He put both hands flat on the desk and stared at them. 11 weeks. He counted backward. The math was brutal and exact. There was no version of this that wasn't real. "Does anyone else know?" "No." "We keep it that way," he said, and the boss came back into his voice. The man who handled things, who contained disasters, who did not let anything spiral beyond what he could manage. "I need time to think." "You have time, Vanessa said. "Not unlimited time, but some." She stood. She tucked the folder under her arm. She walked to the door with the bearing of someone who had just played an opening move and was comfortable waiting for the response. "Cassian," she said, pausing. He looked up. "Elena is never going to forgive you." He said nothing. She left. He sat in that office until past midnight. He sat there while Elena was presumably home asleep, while the city hummed and negotiated and threatened outside, while 11 weeks became a number he couldn't stop turning over in his mind. He thought about Elena's face at the dinner table when she'd said, "Don't do that tonight." He thought about the look in her eyes when he'd answered the phone. He thought about all the things he'd been meaning to fix and hadn't. When he finally went home, Elena was in bed with the light off. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a long moment, looking at the shape of her under the blankets. Her breathing was too even for sleep. He knew she was awake. She knew he knew. Neither of them said anything. He went to the guest room. In the morning, he would handle it. He would find a way. He was Cassian Moretti. He had rebuilt the entire organizational structure of a criminal empire from a rented office with 2 phones and a coffee maker. He could fix this. What he did not know, what was folded quietly inside Elena's bedside drawer, was a small black and white photograph. Grainy, unmistakable. The heartbeat he hadn't heard yet. His wife had spent 3 weeks planning how to tell him something, and he had spent that evening discovering a secret of his own. And somewhere between those 2 impossible truths, the marriage that had survived everything was about to discover exactly what it couldn't survive. Neither of them slept. The city outside kept moving, indifferent and enormous, and in 2 separate rooms of the same house, the 2 people who had built a life together lay awake carrying secrets that were slowly, inevitably, becoming too heavy to hold alone. Cassian did not sleep that night. Not even close. He lay in the guest room with his forearm over his eyes, and the ceiling fan turning slow overhead, and the kind of silence that isn't quiet at all. It's full of everything you're trying not to think about. 11 weeks. He kept coming back to that number the way a tongue keeps finding a cracked tooth. 11 weeks. And Vanessa had said nothing. 11 weeks. And he had convinced himself that chapter was closed, sealed, dealt with the way he dealt with everything he didn't want to examine too closely. He had been wrong. Around 3 in the morning, he got up, went to the kitchen, and stood in front of the open refrigerator for 4 minutes without taking anything out of it. Then he closed it and sat at the kitchen island in the dark, and thought about the look on Elena's face when he'd answered the phone at dinner. Not anger. That would have been easier. It was something quieter and more final than anger. It was the look of a woman who had already begun preparing herself for a conclusion she hadn't named yet. He went back to bed just before 4, lay there until 6. When he heard Elena moving in the master bedroom, the sound of her closet opening, the particular creak of the third floorboard, he got up, pulled on a shirt, and went to the hallway. She was already dressed, hair up, bag over her shoulder, moving toward the stairs like she had somewhere to be, which she didn't, not on a Thursday morning, which meant she was leaving before he could speak first. Elena. She stopped, didn't turn immediately. That half-second pause told him everything about how carefully she was controlling this moment. She turned. Her face was composed in a way that took effort. He could see the effort. "I wanted to talk last night," he said. "You should have thought of that before you left the restaurant." "I know. I'm sorry." "You said that already." She came down 2 stairs and then stopped, which put her at eye level with him in a way that felt intentional. "Cassian, I've been patient. For a long time, I have been very, very patient. But I need you to tell me what is actually happening, because whatever it is sitting in this house like a third person, and I am tired of pretending I can't feel it." He looked at her, at the set of her jaw, at the way her hands were gripping the strap of her bag. He thought about Vanessa's voice. "Elena is never going to forgive you." "There's a situation at work," he said. "A complicated one. I'm handling it." The silence that followed was short and devastating. "Okay," Elena said. "Just that. Okay." She walked down the rest of the stairs, past him, and out the front door, and the sound of it closing behind her was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the sound of something clicking shut. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Marco. Marco Vitale was Cassian's underboss and had been since the early days. A stocky, careful man with a gray streak in his hair and the kind of loyalty that wasn't purchased, just lived in. He arrived at the house 40 minutes later, let himself in through the side entrance, and found Cassian in the study with 2 cups of coffee already made. "You look terrible," Marco said. "Sit down." Marco sat. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and looked at Cassian with the patient expression of a man who had received a great deal of bad news over the years and had learned to wait for it to arrive in whatever shape it chose. Cassian told him about Vanessa. Not all of it. He told him about the pregnancy, the timeline, the conversation in the office. He did not tell him about Elena's dinner, about the anniversary, about the look on his wife's face. Some things were not syndicate business. He still believed that morning that he could keep the lines clear. Marco was quiet for a long time after. "Does she want money?" he asked finally. "She didn't ask for money." "What did she ask for?" Cassian thought about how Vanessa had said it. "Your child deserves to exist without being a secret." "She hasn't asked for anything yet. That's what worries me." Marco turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the desk. "The captains can't find out about this. Not yet." "I know that." "Ricci and Fontaine are already pushing for a seat at the table. Any hint of instability?" "I said I know, Marco." Marco stopped turning the mug. "Then what do you need from me?" "I need someone watching Vanessa. Discreetly. I need to know who she talks to, who she sees. I need to know if this is just what she says it is, or if there's something else moving underneath it." "You think she's playing you?" Cassian looked out the window. The morning was gray and thin, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything. "I think she's smarter than I gave her credit for. And I think the last time I assumed someone's motives were exactly what they appeared to be, it cost me 18 months and 3 good men." Marco nodded slowly. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I'll have someone on her by noon." "One more thing." Marco paused. "Elena isn't to know any of this is being handled. Not the surveillance, not Vanessa, none of it. She's—" He stopped. Restarted. "She's already suspicious. I don't want her in the middle of this." Marco looked at him with the particular expression he reserved for moments when he thought Cassian was making a mistake, but understood it wasn't his call. "All right." He left. Cassian finished his coffee alone. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have seen from where he was sitting, was that 40 minutes earlier, Vanessa Cross had made a phone call. Not from her office phone. From a secondhand cell she kept in the bottom of her gym bag. The conversation was short, 9 minutes, conducted in the parking garage beneath her apartment building where the signal was bad and the cameras had been spray painted over 6 weeks ago. The man on the other end had a low voice and precise diction and went by the name Damien Voss, though that was not the name Vanessa thought of when she thought of him. She thought of him as an investor, a silent partner in a plan she believed she had authored herself. She told him the conversation with Cassian had gone exactly as expected. Damien Voss told her she had done well, and to keep going, and to remember what they had discussed about the charity gala. She told him she remembered. She did not ask why a man who claimed to only care about her future was so specifically interested in the timing of a charity event hosted by the Moretti Foundation. She would think about that later. Much later. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, Cassian ran his empire the way he always had. Meetings, decisions, corrections. But underneath every conversation was the hum of something unresolved. He called Vanessa once, told her to come in for a private meeting, and spent 45 minutes trying to understand what she actually wanted. She remained careful, measured. She spoke about the baby with a matter-of-factness that he couldn't decide was genuine or performed. She didn't threaten, she didn't demand. She sat across from him with her hands folded and answered his questions and let the silence do most of the work. She was very good at silence. Elena, meanwhile, had started noticing things. Not dramatic things, small things. The way Cassian's phone was now always face down. The way he angled his laptop screen when she walked into the room. The way he answered her questions with questions instead of answers, which was something he only did when he was managing information. She had lived beside this man for 14 years. She knew the difference between Cassian, who was stressed about business, and Cassian, who was concealing something. She had learned to read the signs the way you learn to read weather, not always sure of the forecast, but never wrong about the approaching storm. On the 4th morning, she went through his jacket, not proudly. She stood in the walk-in closet with his suit jacket in her hands and felt the specific shame of a woman who had never needed to do this before, who had told herself she would never be this woman. And then she checked the inside pocket anyway, because the alternative was continuing to smile across the dinner table at a man who was lying to her face. She found nothing. The jacket was clean. She put it back exactly as she'd found it. Went to the bathroom. Ran the tap cold and pressed her wrists under it. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her older sister, Diane, who lived 2 hours away and had never trusted Cassian even during the good years, and who would, Elena knew, say things she wasn't ready to hear. "I need to ask you something," Elena said when Diane picked up. "Good morning to you too. I need you to not editorialize. I just need you to listen." A pause. "Okay. How do you know?" Elena said. "How do you know when it's over?" The silence on Diane's end was careful and sad. "Is this about Cassian? How do you know when the thing you've been afraid of has already happened and you just haven't admitted it yet?" "Elena, don't say his name like that." "Like what?" "Like you've been waiting for this." Diane was quiet. Then, carefully, "I haven't been waiting for it. I've been worried about it. There's a difference." Elena sat on the edge of the bed. The morning light was coming through the curtains at a low angle and falling across the floor in long yellow stripes. She thought about the ultrasound in her bedside drawer. She had been carrying it for 3 weeks like a talisman, waiting for the right moment to use it. "Something is wrong," she said. "I don't know what it is. He won't tell me, and I'm so tired of not knowing that I'm starting to think the not knowing is its own answer." "Come here," Diane said immediately. "Pack a bag and come here tonight." "I can't." "Why not?" Elena thought about the anniversary dinner she hadn't finished, the conversation they still hadn't had, the words she had rehearsed that were still sitting in her chest, waiting. "Because I'm not ready to leave yet," she said. She meant it as a statement about logistics. It landed, even to her own ear, like something else. She hung up without resolving anything. That afternoon, Marco called Cassian with the first piece of surveillance information. "She had lunch today," Marco said. "Not at the usual place. Downtown, private room, corner booth. She was there for 90 minutes. "Who with?" "That's the part you're not going to like." A pause that Marco used like punctuation to let the wait arrive before the words. "Theodore Prine." Cassian went still. Theodore Prine was not a man who had lunch for 90 minutes with executive secretaries unless the executive secretary had something he wanted. He was a senior partner at the law firm that had handled 3 of the Moretti organization's largest legitimate acquisitions. He had access to financial structures, LLC chains, trust arrangements, the architecture of Cassian's legal empire. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "She's building something," Cassian said. It wasn't a question. "Looks like it." He thought about Vanessa's face during their meeting, the precise patience of it, the way she'd answered every question without giving him any new information. "Pull everything on Prine," he said. "Every piece of work he's done for us in the last 3 years. I want to know exactly what she could have accessed through him." "And Vanessa?" "Keep watching." He hung up and sat in his car in the parking structure beneath the Moretti Group building and tried to understand what he was dealing with. If Vanessa was building a legal case, some kind of paternity claim, a financial entrenchment, that was one category of problem. Manageable. Expensive, but manageable. If she was doing something else, something that required the specific knowledge Theodore Prine carried, that was a different category entirely. He thought about his own stupidity with a clarity that was almost physical, not for the first time, but more sharply than before. He had made an error of approximately the size of his entire adult life, and now that error was meeting with corporate attorneys and keeping him up at night, and he still hadn't told his wife that she was about to find out through means he couldn't control. He drove home. Elena was in the kitchen making tea, which she only did when she couldn't sleep, even though it was 7 in the evening, which meant she hadn't stopped thinking all day. "Sit down," he said. She looked at him. The tea mug stopped halfway to her mouth. "Cassian, please, sit down. I need to tell you something." She sat. She put the mug on the counter with the particular deliberateness of someone preparing to absorb impact. He sat across from her. He looked at the table for a moment, organizing it, and then he looked at her face and felt the words dissolve. What he had planned to say was this: "There is a situation with someone at work. It involves me. It happened before I understood how much I was losing. I need you to hear it from me first." What he actually said was, "Elena, the last few years, I know things haven't been—" "Don't," she said. "I need you to know—" "Cassian," her voice was very quiet, "if you're about to tell me something happened, I need you to understand that I will not be able to unhear it. Whatever it is. Once you say it, we are in a different place than we are right now." She looked at him steadily. "So I am asking you, before you say whatever you came in here to say, is there any version of this where we don't have to be in that different place?" He looked at her. He thought about Vanessa and Theodore Prine and the meeting and 11 weeks and everything hurtling forward with or without his participation. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think there is." Elena nodded, slowly, like a woman receiving a diagnosis she had already suspected. "Then I need a minute," she said, "before you say it." She got up, took her tea to the window, stood with her back to him and her face toward the dark glass. He watched her shoulders, the way they rose and fell with 2 deliberate breaths. He was going to tell her right then. He had decided. Whatever came after, whatever she said, whatever it cost, she was going to hear it from him. Then his phone rang. The ringtone was specific, a tone he had assigned to Marco only, for emergencies only, a sound he had never heard at 7 in the evening at the kitchen table with his wife standing 3 feet away. Elena turned from the window. She looked at the phone on the table between them. She looked at him. He picked it up. "Not now," he said into the phone. "Cassian." Marco's voice was stripped of everything except the information. "Ricci just called a captain's meeting, tonight, without you." The floor dropped out of the room. "Where?" "Warehouse on Celeste Street, 9 o'clock. A captain's meeting without the boss wasn't a meeting. It was a message. It meant someone had decided the boss was compromised enough that decisions could be made around him. It meant the rumors had already started. It meant what he had thought was contained was anything but. "I have to go," Cassian said. He put the phone down. He looked at Elena. She was still standing by the window. Her tea was cooling on the sill. Her face had gone very still in the way faces go when the thing you've been bracing for finally arrives and turns out to be worse than you imagined and better than you'll feel tomorrow. "Of course you do," she said. "Elena, go," she said. Not angry, not broken, just finished, for now, with this particular moment. "Whatever you were going to say will still be true when you get back." He left. She stood at the window after he was gone and watched the taillights of his car disappear at the end of the drive. Then she went upstairs, quietly, and opened the bedside drawer and took out the ultrasound photograph. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and typed a name into a search bar. Not a criminal's name, not a rival's name, a lawyer's name. She did not fill out any forms that night. She did not make any decisions. She only looked at the screen and breathed and let herself understand, slowly and completely, that the woman who had sacrificed 14 years of her own life for a man in a world that was now actively concealing something from her was going to need, at some point very soon, a plan of her own. The Moretti Foundation Charity Gala was 12 days away. She had bought a dress for it 3 weeks ago, before the pregnancy, before the missed dinner, before the phone calls and the turned-down screens and the guest room door. She had chosen it carefully. Navy blue, architectural in the shoulder, the kind of dress that said, "I am exactly where I'm supposed to be without trying too hard." She went to the closet and looked at it hanging there in its plastic wrap. She thought about wearing it. She thought about walking into that ballroom on Cassian Moretti's arm and smiling at every person in that room the way she had been smiling for years. She thought about her sister's voice on the phone. "How do you know when it's over?" She closed the closet. She did not take the dress down, but she did not put the lawyer's name away either. She lay in bed that night with the ultrasound against her chest and the laptop open beside her and made no decision except to keep breathing until morning. Across the city, in a restaurant that did not appear on any of the Moretti surveillance lists because it was registered under a shell company established 14 months prior, Damien Voss sat across a corner table from a woman he had been cultivating for 2 years, with the patience of a man who understood that the best way to destroy an empire was not from the outside, where the walls were strongest, but from the inside, where the people who built it kept all their. Damien Voss had a way of sitting that made every room feel like it belonged to him. Not through size, he wasn't a physically imposing man. Medium height, lean, the kind of face that photographers called interesting rather than handsome. But he sat with a specific stillness that communicated, without words, that he had already considered every exit in the room and found them all unnecessary. He was the kind of man who didn't need to leave because he was always, in every situation, exactly where he intended to be. Vanessa sat across from him now, with her hands around a glass of water she hadn't drunk, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was thinking faster than she was speaking, moving slightly, tracking invisible calculations. "The captain's meeting happened," she said. "I know. Ricci called it without cash-in. That's exactly what was supposed to happen." Damien touched the rim of his own glass, lightly, one finger. When a structure starts to believe its leader is distracted, it begins to reorganize around the distraction. It's not betrayal, it's gravity. Ricci is ambitious, but he's not stupid. If he finds out I'm involved, he won't. Damien looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had already decided the outcome of this conversation and was waiting patiently for her to arrive there too. "Vanessa, what do you want? At the end of all of this, what do you actually want?" She looked at him. "Security," she said, "for the baby. A position that can't be revoked. And you believe Cassian will give you that. I believe I can make the cost of not giving it to me higher than the cost of giving it." Damien smiled. It was a small smile, technical, the expression of a man acknowledging competent work rather than expressing genuine warmth. "That's the right instinct," he said, "but your leverage has a window. The gala is 12 days away. After that, the financial restructuring cash-in has been planning goes through 3 different holding companies and becomes significantly harder to touch." She went still. "How do you know about the restructuring?" "Because Theodore Prine did work for me 18 months before he did work for Cassian," Damien said simply. "And men like Theodore have a difficult time being loyal to 2 clients simultaneously. Eventually, they choose the one who knows more about them." Vanessa stared at him. Something moved in the back of her mind. A sensation she didn't have language for yet. Not quite suspicion, not quite fear, more like the feeling of a floor that has just shifted a fraction of an inch beneath your feet. Enough to notice, not enough to act on. Not yet. "What do you need me to do before the gala?" she asked. Damien reached into his jacket and placed a small envelope on the table between them. "There's a set of security codes in there. Server room access for the Moretti Group building. I need them updated in the system to allow for a secondary user before the end of next week. She looked at the envelope, did not touch it. That's not financial leverage, she said slowly. That's infiltration. It's preparation. Damien, she looked up at him. What exactly are you preparing for? He held her gaze for 3 seconds, the precise amount of time it takes to make someone feel seen without making them feel understood. Your future, he said, and your child's. She picked up the envelope. She told herself it was the right move. She told herself a great many things in that restaurant, sitting across from Damien Voss, and she believed most of them because she needed to, because the alternative was sitting alone with the reality that the plan she thought she had authored might have been written by someone else entirely, with her as a character rather than the author. She took the envelope home. She did not sleep either. The captain's meeting on Celeste Street lasted 2 hours. Cassian arrived 11 minutes after it started, late enough to make a statement about his awareness, early enough to prevent any formal decisions from being made without him. He walked through the warehouse door with Marco at his shoulder and 2 men behind him, and the 11 captains seated around the long table looked up with the varied expressions of men caught in the middle of something they hadn't planned to be caught in. Ricci was at the head of the table. That alone was its own declaration. Cassian, Ricci said. He had the composure of a man who had prepared for this moment, but was discovering that preparation and readiness are not the same thing. Ricci. Cassian pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. Not the head, not a neutral position, directly opposite Ricci, as clear a territorial marker as it was possible to make with furniture. He sat down. He looked at the room. Someone want to tell me what we're discussing? Silence. Then Fontaine, who was sitting to Ricci's left and had the decency to look uncomfortable. There are concerns about the organization's direction. Whose concerns? More silence. I'm asking a simple question, Cassian said. His voice was level. It was always level, which was what made it frightening. Shouting required emotion. Level required control, and control in Cassian Moretti had always meant that the temperature in the room was being set by someone who had already decided where it was going. Someone in this room called a meeting without me. That person has concerns. I'd like to hear them. Ricci leaned forward. I was older than Cassian by 8 years, broader, with the built-up confidence of a man who had been waiting for a specific opportunity for a very long time. The rumor is that there's an heir situation, a contested one. Cassian did not blink. Rumor, he said. Is that what it is? I'm asking. And I'm asking back, Ricci said, and his voice had found its footing now. Because if the boss has an outside situation, a child, a claim, that becomes a succession issue. That becomes everyone's problem. And the last time this organization had a succession problem, 3 of us weren't around to see how it resolved. The room was holding its breath. Cassian looked at Ricci for a long moment. He looked at the 11 men around the table, at the particular quality of their attention. Not hostile, most of them, but waiting, assessing, trying to determine whether the structure they had built their livelihoods around was as solid as it had always appeared. This meeting, Cassian said finally, didn't happen. He stood. Whatever concerns exist about the organization's direction, they come to me directly. Not around me. Not in rented warehouses at 9 in the evening. To me. In my office. Through Marco. He buttoned his jacket. That's how it's always worked. That's how it works tonight. Anyone who has a different understanding of how it works should say so now. Nobody said anything. Not even Ricci. Cassian nodded once. He left. Marco followed. The 2 men behind them followed. Outside, in the cold air beside the car, Marco exhaled slowly. That bought us time, he said. Not much. Cassian got in the car. Pull everything on Ricci. Finances, associations, the last 6 months of movement. If he's coordinating with someone outside, I want to know before the week is out. Marco got in beside him. You think he's working with someone? I think a man like Ricci doesn't call a captain's meeting based on a rumor he heard from the wind. Someone fed him that information. Someone wanted that meeting to happen. Cassian stared at the warehouse wall through the windshield. Find the someone. They drove back in silence. What Cassian did not know, what Marco did not know, was that the rumor Ricci had referenced had not spread organically through the organization's natural gossip channels. It had been placed, specifically, deliberately, into the ear of Ricci's driver by a man who worked valet at the Moretti Group building and who had been on Damien Voss's payroll for 7 months. The rumor was accurate but incomplete, designed to be just true enough to be believed and just vague enough to generate maximum anxiety. It said, "The boss has a situation with a woman, a child. Elena doesn't know." It didn't say who the woman was. It didn't need to. In a world built on loyalty and bloodline, the specific woman was less important than the fact of the fracture. The next morning, Elena had an appointment she hadn't mentioned to cash in. She sat in the office of a family attorney named Sylvia Park, who had been recommended by her sister Diane and who came with a reputation for handling high-net-worth separations with the precision of a surgeon and the discretion of a sealed court record. Sylvia Park was a small woman with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She had the particular economy of motion that comes from spending 20 years in rooms where every word costs something. Elena sat across from her with her purse in her lap and her spine perfectly straight and described her situation in the flat, factual voice of a woman who has cried about something enough times that she has moved past the crying and into the assessment phase. She described the marriage, the organization, the assets she was aware of, and the assets she suspected she was not aware of. She described the distance and the phone calls and the missed anniversary dinner. She did not describe the ultrasound in her purse. Not yet. Sylvia listened without interrupting, making notes on a legal pad in handwriting too small to read from across the desk. When Elena finished, Sylvia said, "You haven't confirmed infidelity." "No." "But you believe it." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I believe something has happened that he hasn't told me about. And I believe he would only not tell me if it was the kind of thing I wouldn't recover from hearing." "That's not the same thing." "I know." Sylvia looked at her over the glasses. "Mrs. Moretti, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not because it changes my job, but because it changes yours. Do you want to save this marriage or end it?" The question sat between them. Elena had expected it, had prepared for it during the drive over, had rehearsed 2 or 3 different versions of an answer. She had planned to say something measured and appropriate. "I want to understand my options," or "I want to protect myself," or some other formulation that kept all the doors open. What she actually said was, "I don't know yet." Sylvia nodded as if that was the correct answer. "Then what I'd suggest is that we begin documentation without filing anything. We establish the financial picture, we identify the protected assets, we understand what a settlement would look like if you chose to move in that direction. That way, if you decide you want to fight for the marriage, you've lost nothing. And if you decide you don't, you're not starting from zero." Elena nodded. "There's something else," she said. She opened her purse. She took out the ultrasound and placed it on the desk between them. "I'm 14 weeks pregnant." Sylvia looked at the image, then at Elena. "Does your husband know?" "No." "When are you planning to tell him?" Elena picked up the ultrasound and put it back in her purse. "When I know whether telling him is something I want to do." She left Sylvia Park's office at 11:45 and sat in her car in the parking structure for 6 minutes before starting the engine. She sat with her hands in her lap and felt the particular weight of the morning. Not grief exactly, not resolution, just the dense, complicated mass of a life in the process of being reconsidered. She started the car. She did not go home. She drove to the architecture school she had attended 20 years ago and parked across the street and looked at the building for a while. She didn't go in. She just looked at it. At the students coming and going through the glass doors with their portfolios and their laptops and their faces full of a future they hadn't been talked out of yet. Then she drove home. 8 days before the Moretti Foundation Charity Gala, Marco delivered a piece of information that changed the shape of everything. He came to Cashin's office at 7 in the morning, which meant it couldn't wait and he hadn't wanted to say it on the phone. He sat down in the chair across from Cashin's desk and placed a printed photograph between them. It showed Vanessa Cross and Damien Voss at a corner table in a restaurant. The date stamp was from 6 weeks ago. Cassian looked at the photograph for a long time. "How long?" he said. "The earliest confirmed contact we've found is 14 months ago," Marco said. "But the financial trail suggests the relationship goes back further than that. Possibly 2 years." 2 years. Cashin did the math without wanting to. 2 years ago was when Vanessa had transferred into his direct staff. 2 years ago was when Damien Voss had begun his quiet, incremental push against the edges of Moretti territory. 2 years ago was when everything had started moving in a direction Cassian had never been able to fully account for. She came to me, he said. Not to Marco, to himself. The pregnancy. She brought it to me. I didn't find out on my own. Yes. That was the opening move. Marco said nothing. Cassian stood up. He walked to the window. Below, the city was going about its morning with total indifference to the fact that the ground floor of a 14-year criminal empire was currently being eaten from underneath by a woman he had slept with 6 times and a man he had underestimated for 2 years. The server room, he said suddenly. Run a diagnostic. Every access point, every user credential, everything that's been touched in the last 30 days. Marco was already on his phone before the sentence was finished. The diagnostic came back in 4 hours. There was a secondary user credential buried in the access system, created 9 days ago. Time-stamped at 2:43 in the morning, which meant it had been done remotely, from outside the building, by someone who had both the technical knowledge and the physical access codes to create a ghost entry in a system that was supposed to be impenetrable. The credential had not been used yet. It was waiting. For what? Marco said. For the gala, Cassian said. The Foundation servers are connected to the main financial network during the gala for the donation processing. It's a 40-minute window, every year. We've always considered it low risk because the event is locked down. Marco understood before he finished. They're going to drain the accounts. Not just drain them. If they get into the financial architecture during that window, they can remap the entire organizational structure. Shell companies, property holdings, everything that's legitimate. It gets transferred, legally, in real time, before anyone knows it's happening. Cassian turned from the window. His face was the specific blank of a man who has moved past emotional response into pure tactical processing. Damien doesn't want to shoot his way into this organization. He wants to buy it, with our own money, while we're all standing in a ballroom eating shrimp cocktail. The room was very quiet. And Vanessa, Marco said carefully, she's the one who put the credential in. She's the one who had access to put it in. Cassian sat back down. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. She thinks she's securing a future. She thinks Damien is her partner. She doesn't know she's the delivery mechanism for her own replacement. What do we do? We let them think it's working, Cassian said. We don't touch the credential. We don't tip off Ricci or anyone else that we know. We go to the gala. And? And we use the 40-minute window ourselves. Marco stared at him. That's dangerous, yes. But it's the only scenario where we catch Damien in the act with evidence that's admissible in every court and every boardroom simultaneously. If we move on him before the gala, we get one man and a conspiracy charge that takes 3 years to prosecute. If we let it play out and close the window from the inside, we get everything, Marco said quietly. We get everything. It was the right call. Cassian believed that. He had made harder calls under worse conditions and been right about them. What he could not account for, what no amount of tactical intelligence had prepared him for, was what happened 4 days before the gala at 7:30 in the evening in the lobby of the Moretti Group building. Elena had come to the building. She had not called ahead. She had not asked permission. She had dressed in the navy blue gown she'd bought 3 weeks ago, come downtown, taken the elevator to the 42nd floor, and walked through the glass doors of the Moretti Group's main reception area. She told the receptionist she was there to see her husband. The receptionist, who was new and did not fully understand the geography of her position, told Mrs. Moretti that Mr. Moretti was in a meeting and asked if she had an appointment. Elena looked at the receptionist with the calm of a woman who had spent the last 10 days deciding exactly who she was going to be from this point forward. I'm his wife, she said. I don't make appointments. She walked down the hall. She pushed open the door to Cassian's office. Cassian was there. Marco was there. And Vanessa Cross was there, standing beside the desk with a document in her hand and the particular proprietary ease of someone who had been in this room many times and was comfortable in it. And she turned when the door opened and looked at Elena with an expression that shifted through 3 emotions in under a second. Surprise, calculation, and then something that might have been, in another life, something close to guilt. Elena looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Elena. Cassian stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. Elena, who is she? Elena's voice was completely steady. It was the steadiness of a woman who had used up all her trembling in private. She's my... He stopped. Every word was wrong. Every available word was wrong. She works for me. I know who she works for, Elena said. She had not moved from the doorway. She was looking at Vanessa with the specific attention of a woman cataloging something she will need to remember precisely. I'm asking who she is. Vanessa did not speak. Cassian. Elena finally looked at him. I want you to tell me right now, whatever it is. I want you to say it. The air in the room had the quality of the 3 seconds before a car accident, everything moving, nothing able to stop. Cassian opened his mouth, and Vanessa, quietly, with the timing of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, said, I'm pregnant, with his child. The silence afterward was absolute. Elena did not move. She did not make a sound. She stood in the doorway of her husband's office in the dress she had bought for their anniversary dinner and looked at the woman who had just said those words. And something happened in her face that was more frightening than tears, a kind of stillness that comes when a person's interior world reorganizes itself around a new and devastating truth. She looked at Cassian. He looked back at her and said her name, and it came out broken, the first broken thing she had heard from him in years, and under different circumstances it might have meant something. She turned around. She walked back down the hall. She took the elevator down. She walked through the lobby. She pushed through the glass doors into the night air, and she kept walking until she found a bench on the plaza outside the building, and she sat on it and put her hands in her lap and stared at the fountain in front of her. The fountain was running, water falling over itself, lit from below, continuous and indifferent. She sat there for 22 minutes. Then she took out her phone and called her sister. I know, she said when Diane answered. Elena, I know what it is, I know. Her voice was flat and clear. I need you to find me a place to stay tonight. Not here, not the house. Of course, come now. I need to do something first. She hung up. She opened her purse. She took out the ultrasound and looked at it one more time. Then she stood up, went back inside the building, took the elevator back to 42, walked past the receptionist who said nothing this time, and went back to Cassian's office. He was alone. Vanessa was gone. Marco was gone. He was standing in the middle of the room looking like a man waiting for a sentence. She put the ultrasound on his desk. He looked down at it. She watched his face as he understood what he was looking at, watched the specific sequence of it, recognition, then the math, then something that went through him like a current, visible even now, even after everything. I was going to tell you at dinner, she said. The anniversary dinner. That was why I planned it. That was why I asked you to give me that night. She picked up the ultrasound and put it back in her purse. I'm going to my sister's. I don't want you to call me tonight. Elena, please, don't. She looked at him one final time. I'm not leaving you tonight because I've decided anything. I'm leaving because if I stay in this house, I will make decisions I haven't finished thinking through, and this child... Her voice broke then, just for a second, a single fracture. She sealed it immediately. This child deserves better than decisions made in anger. She walked out. This time, she did not come back. In the parking garage beneath the building, Vanessa sat in her car with both hands on the steering wheel and felt, for the first time since she had walked into Cassian's private office 11 weeks ago, something cold and clarifying move through her chest. Elena Moretti had walked into that office in a blue dress and stood in the doorway and looked at Vanessa, and in that look was something Vanessa had not prepared herself to see. Not hatred, not accusation, but recognition. The look of a woman who understood exactly what had been done to her marriage and by whom, and who had chosen, in that moment, dignity over destruction. Vanessa had seen that look and felt for 8 seconds genuinely ashamed. Then Elena had left, and the shame had been followed quickly by something else. A series of rapid, cold realizations landing one after another like stones dropped into still water. She thought about Damien's words in the restaurant. Your leverage has a window. She thought about the envelope with the server codes. She thought about Theodore Prine and his careful hands and his careful mouth, and the way he had answered her questions without quite answering them. She thought about the specific phrasing Damien had used when describing what would happen after the gala. Your future. Your child's. He had never said our future. Not once. Not in 14 months of meetings in private rooms and carefully orchestrated conversations. Not once had Damien Voss said the word we when describing what came after. She sat in the parking garage and felt the floor shift beneath her again, harder this time, much harder, and this time she had the language for it. She picked up her phone, not the second-hand cell, her real phone. She opened a browser and searched for a name, not Damien's, not Cassian's, but a corporate attorney in the financial district who specialized in whistleblower protections and had never in 15 years of practice lost a client to retribution. She stared at the number for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel and tried to think clearly about what she had done, what she was still in the middle of doing, and whether the man she had trusted with her future had ever intended to let her have Vanessa made the call at 11:43 at night, still sitting in the parking garage, the engine off, the concrete around her smelling of exhaust and cold. The attorney's voicemail picked up on the third ring. She left a message. 12 seconds? No more. Her name, her number, the words: "I have information about a planned financial crime, and I need to discuss protective options before Friday." She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap and waited to feel something definitive. Relief or terror, or the clean snap of a decision made. She felt none of those things. She felt only the specific nausea of a woman who has just understood, completely and too late, that she has been a tool in someone else's hand for so long that she can no longer locate where the manipulation ended and her own choices began. She drove home. She did not sleep. At 6:15 the following morning, Cassian was already in his car when his phone rang. Not Marco. The number on the screen was one he didn't recognize, which meant it had been routed through his clean line. The number known only to people who had been given it for specific, serious purposes. He answered. "This is going to be a strange phone call," said the voice on the other end. Female. Steady, with the particular controlled quality of someone managing significant adrenaline. "My name is Vanessa Cross. I think you already know that. I need to meet with you today. Not at the building. Not anywhere your regular people would expect." Cassian said nothing for 3 seconds. "Why?" he said. "Because I've been doing something I shouldn't have been doing for 14 months, and I only understood how bad it was last night. And if I don't tell you before Friday, then people are going to get hurt, and I—" She stopped, restarted. "I can't let that happen." "What people?" A pause. "Elena." He pulled the car over. They met at 10 in the morning in a coffee shop 30 blocks from the Moretti Group building, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a broken espresso machine and nobody in it who cared who anyone else was. Cassian came alone. He had told Marco where he was going, and Marco had objected once, and Cassian had looked at him until the objection stopped. Vanessa was already there when he arrived. She was sitting with both hands around a coffee she hadn't touched, and she looked, for the first time in his experience of her, genuinely frightened. Not the managed, useful kind of fear that people perform to generate sympathy. The real kind. The kind that makes a person smaller. He sat down across from her. She told him everything. Not quickly. It came out in the jagged, overlapping way of information that has been organized under pressure and keeps escaping its own structure. She told him about Damien Voss and the 14 months and the meetings in private rooms. She told him about Theodore Prine and what Damien had implied about his loyalties. She told him about the server credential and the envelope and the specific instructions she had been given about the gala's 40-minute financial window. She told him that she had installed the credential 9 days ago. She told him that she had believed, genuinely believed, that she was building something for herself and her child. That Damien had positioned himself as a resource, a protector, a man who saw opportunity in her situation and wanted to help her leverage it. She told him when she had started to suspect something was wrong. She told him what she had seen in Elena's face last night. When she finished, the coffee shop was playing something low and instrumental that neither of them heard. Cassian sat with his forearms on the table and looked at a fixed point somewhere to the left of her shoulder and did not speak for a long time. "The credential," he said finally. "You created secondary access." "Yes." "With the codes Damien gave you?" "Yes." "Did you know what it would be used for?" She hesitated. "He told me it was for contingency access, in case the Moretti financial network needed to be audited during a transition." She heard herself say it and felt the words land with the weight of what they actually were. "He told me it was protective, for the baby, for our position." "He told you," Cassian said, and his voice was the flattest she had ever heard it, that giving him access to the financial backbone of a criminal organization was protective. I know how it sounds. Do you? Cassian. He was going to empty it, Cassian said. Everything. The legitimate holdings, the property trusts, the operating accounts for 17 businesses. In 40 minutes, while everyone was at the gala, he was going to transfer legal ownership of every entity I've spent 14 years building through that credential you installed. By the time anyone knew what happened, it would be done. Legally. He finally looked at her directly. And then you would have had nothing. Not a position, not protection, not a seat at any table. He doesn't want a queen. He wants a clean acquisition. You were the key. Vanessa had known this. She had understood it last night in the parking garage. In the abstract. In the terrible way you understand things you don't want to be true. But hearing it stated in Cassian's flat, certain voice made it solid in a way her own internal voice hadn't managed. Her jaw tightened. She would not cry in this coffee shop. She had decided that in the car. What happens now? She said. Now, Cassian said. You go back to your apartment and you answer every message from Damien exactly the way you have been. You tell him the credential is in place. You tell him you're attending the gala. You tell him nothing has changed. You're going to use the gala. I'm going to finish this at the gala. Yes. She looked at him. And me? The question had multiple meanings, and they both understood all of them. You cooperate fully, he said, with me, and afterward with whoever handles the legal side of Damien's organization. Everything you know, every meeting, every instruction, you give it all. And the baby? He looked at her. Something moved in his face, not forgiveness, not warmth, but something that was perhaps the shadow of a decision being made at a level below language. Your child is not a weapon, he said, and not a casualty. That's all I can tell you right now. She nodded. She stood. She picked up the untouched coffee and then put it back down. Cassian. She didn't look at him. Elena, don't, he said. She left. He sat alone in the coffee shop for 4 minutes. Then he called Marco. We're moving the plan up, he said, and we have a problem with the gala that's actually an opportunity. Get everyone together. 2 hours. The next 3 days were the longest of Marco Vitale's professional life. The operation they assembled was not large, 9 men total, all from the innermost circle, all with specific technical or physical roles. No captains, no second-tier personnel. Ricci and Fontaine knew nothing. The plan required the appearance of absolute normalcy until the moment it didn't. The Moretti Foundation Charity Gala was a real event. 240 guests, legitimate donors, city officials, press photographers at the entrance. Elena's name was still on the seating chart. There had been no announcement, no public change of status. The Moretti marriage to the outside world was intact. Cassian had called Elena twice since she'd left. She had not answered. He had sent one text. I know you need time. I'm not asking for anything except that you let me know you're safe. She had replied with 2 words. I'm safe. Nothing else. He had looked at those 2 words for a long time. He had not pushed. The morning of the gala, he sat in his office with the financial systems team and walked through every element of Damien's plan from the inside. They identified the exact pathway the secondary credential would use, the sequence of transfers, the timing. They built a counter-architecture, a series of tripwires in the system that would not block the credential but would record every action it took in real time, creating an unalterable evidence chain while simultaneously rerouting any initiated transfers into a legal hold rather than completing them. Damien would believe the transfers were executing. He would believe he had won. He would be inside the window, committed, exposed, and provably criminal, all at the same time. There was one remaining variable. Damien Voss was not a man who operated remotely for something this significant. He would want to be close, which meant he would be at the gala, or adjacent to it, or in the building. And when his men moved, because there would be men, there were always men, Cassian needed to know where. Marco had spent 2 days building a map of every piece of real estate Damien controlled within 6 blocks of the Moretti Foundation venue. 3 properties. One was a restaurant, closed on Friday nights. One was an office suite, leased under a name that took Marco's contact at the city records office 4 hours to trace back to a shell connected to Damien's network. The third was a warehouse on the waterfront, a quarter-mile from the venue, registered to a logistics company that had not logged a single shipment in 8 months, but whose utility bills were paid current and whose loading bay had been accessed by keycard 7 times in the last 2 weeks. That's where he stages from, Cassian said. Marco nodded. And if he's got people at the venue, he'll have people at the venue, servers, staff, someone at the door. Damien doesn't leave the physical element to chance. Cassian tapped the map. We need his people identified before the event starts, before the first guest walks in. I can get us 3 hours before doors, Marco said. We'll need to be in the building. Make it happen. The afternoon of the gala, Elena was at her sister's kitchen table. She had been there for 4 days. She had not unpacked her bag completely. It was still sitting mostly zipped on the guest room floor, which Diane recognized as her sister, keeping one foot in an undecided place. She had not called a single person. She had eaten enough, slept poorly, and spent a great deal of time sitting at this kitchen table with tea. She let go cold. Diane had been, for 4 days, almost perfectly restrained. She had offered food and company and specific practical information when asked, and she had not said "I told you so" or "I knew" or any variation of the thing that was true but would have cost her a sister to say. On the afternoon of the gala, she sat down across from Elena and said, "Your phone has been going off." "I know." "From his number?" "No." Elena looked at the phone. "From an unknown number, twice." Diane said nothing. Elena picked up the phone. She opened the texts. The first one read, "This is Vanessa Cross. I know you have no reason to read this. Please read it anyway." The second, sent 2 hours after the first, read, "I'm not your enemy. I was used the same way you were used, and tonight something is going to happen that puts you in danger, and I need you to know that before the gala starts. Please don't go to that building tonight." Elena read both texts 3 times. Then she read them once more. "Who is it?" Diane asked. Elena put the phone down. She looked at the table. She thought about the woman who had stood in her husband's office and said those 4 words with the composure of someone who had been preparing to say them. She thought about what she had seen in that woman's face afterward. Not triumph, she realized now. Not the face of a woman who had gotten what she wanted. Something else. Something that had been troubling her for 4 days without her being able to name it. "It's the woman from the office," she said. Diane's expression tightened. "Why is she texting you?" "She says I'm in danger." Elena picked up the phone again. She read the second text a 4th time. "I was used the same way you were used." "She says not to go to the gala tonight." "Then don't go." "I'm listed as co-host," Elena said. "The Moretti Foundation is half mine. My name is on every piece of collateral for this event. If I don't show—" "Elena." "Something is happening tonight," Elena said. "Something bigger than the pregnancy, bigger than whatever happened between them. Something that involves the organization." She looked at her sister. "And Cassian doesn't know she texted me." "How do you know that?" "Because if he knew, he would have called himself." She sat for another minute. Then she called the unknown number back. Vanessa answered on the first ring. "Don't go tonight," Vanessa said immediately, without greeting. "Tell me why," Elena said. Vanessa told her. Not everything, not the credential, not the technical architecture. But she told her about Damien Voss and what he had planned, and she told her that she had reason to believe Damien intended to be physically present near the venue, and that men with his specific profile did not send subordinates to witness their victories, and that there was a version of tonight where it went badly, and the people in that ballroom were not safe. "Does Cassian know you're telling me this?" Elena asked. "He told me not to contact you." "But you are." "Yes." A beat. "Because he's going to walk into that building thinking he has everything controlled and he doesn't have you accounted for. And if something goes wrong, if Damien has a contingency—" She stopped. "You're carrying his child. I know you know I know that. I saw it in your face. And whatever I am in this situation, whatever I've done, I cannot be the person who let something happen to that." Elena sat in the silence of her sister's kitchen. "Where is Damien staging from?" she said. "Elena? Where?" A pause. "A warehouse. Waterfront district. I don't have the exact address." "I'm going to the gala," Elena said. I'm going to the gala and I'm going to walk in through the front door and I'm going to be exactly where everyone expects me to be. And Cassian is going to see me and he is going to understand that I am telling him, without words, that whatever happens tonight, I cannot be someone who stands on the outside of his life while it falls apart." She stopped. Not because I've forgiven him. I haven't. But because this family, she touched her stomach, not consciously, an instinct, is still mine, and I will not let someone else decide what happens to it. The line was very quiet. Then Vanessa said, in a voice with something broken in it, "Wear something you can move in." Elena hung up. She looked at Diane. "I need to borrow a dress," she said. Diane stared at her. "You have a dress." "I can't wear that dress tonight." The gala began at 7. By 6:15, Cassian and Marco were inside the venue with 4 men distributed across the building. 2 in the server room, 1 at the loading entrance, 1 in the mezzanine above the main ballroom with a sightline to the door and the stage. The financial tripwires were armed. The evidence chain was live. The counter-architecture was running silently behind the real system like a shadow. Cassian stood in the empty ballroom and watched the event staff set the final tables and felt the specific heightened clarity of a man who has positioned everything he can position and is now waiting to see which variables he didn't account for. His phone buzzed. Marco. "Ricci is coming tonight. Wasn't on the guest list. Just confirmed at the door." Cassian typed back, "Let him in. Watch him." A minute later, Fontaine too. So they knew. Or someone had told them enough that they wanted to be present. Whether they were Damien's men, opportunists, or something in between, Cassian didn't have time to determine. He filed it and moved forward. At 6:50, the first guests began arriving. At 7:12, a catering van pulled into the service entrance of the building. It was registered to a company that appeared in the event's vendor list, had appeared there for 4 weeks, placed by someone who had access to the Foundation's event management system. 3 men got out. They moved with the practiced invisibility of people who had spent time learning how to look like they belonged somewhere they didn't. The man on the mezzanine saw them. He texted Marco a single word, 3. Marco relayed it to Cassian. Cassian did not change his position. He did not change his expression. He was standing near the bar speaking to the Foundation's director of operations about the audio system when the text came in, and he finished that conversation and excused himself and walked to the men's room and stood at the sink and ran cold water over his wrists and looked at himself in the mirror. He had done this before. Stood in rooms where everything was about to change and breathed through it and come out the other side. He had done it without Elena every time. He turned the tap off. He walked back to the ballroom. She was standing at the entrance. He saw her from 30 feet away. The green dress, different from the blue one. Emerald, her hair down, the way she carried herself that had always been the thing that made every other person in a room slightly less interesting by comparison. She was scanning the space, looking for him, he realized. Not arriving and waiting to be found. Looking. Their eyes met. She did not smile. He did not move. Then she walked toward him, and the 30 feet closed, and she stopped 2 feet away and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her before. Not forgiveness, not anger, something that lived between them. Something that said, "I'm here. I haven't decided anything yet, but I'm here." "You shouldn't be here tonight," he said. His voice was barely above the noise of the room. "I know," she said. "Elena?" "Vanessa called me." She watched his face absorb that, watched the sequence of it. "She told me what's happening tonight. Not everything. Enough. It's not safe, I know. Nothing about our life is safe, Cassian. That's not new information." She held his gaze. "Tell me what you need me to do." He looked at her for 3 seconds that felt much longer. "Stay near Marco," he said. "Do not go below the main floor. If anything changes, I know how to read a room. I know you do." Something moved between them. Not reconciliation, not resolution, just the recognition of 2 people who had built something together and were standing in the wreckage of it and choosing for right now to face the same direction. She nodded once. He turned back to the room. At 8:04, the financial window opened. In the server room 2 floors below the ballroom, the secondary credential activated. Cassian's man watched the access log populate in real time. The transfers initiated, 17, in rapid sequence, each one rerouting into the legal hold without completing, each one logging a full evidence timestamp, each one building the case that would take Damien Voss apart in every courtroom and financial tribunal available. Cassian received the text. "It's running." 1 floor above the server room in the main ballroom, a man Cassian had not identified as one of Damien's 3 was moving toward the stage. Not staff. Not a guest. something in between, the particular blankness of a person whose presence is functional rather than social. The man on the mezzanine saw him. He texted a different word this time, stage. Marco was already moving, and at the waterfront warehouse, a quarter-mile away, Damien Voss stood in front of a bank of monitors showing real-time feeds from 4 cameras inside the venue, placed 6 days ago by the men from the catering van, and watched the transfer logs populate on a laptop beside him, and felt the particular satisfaction of a man watching a mechanism he built perform exactly as designed. He did not yet know that every transfer was being rerouted. He did not yet know that the evidence chain was 17 entries long and growing. He looked at the monitor showing the ballroom entrance and saw Cassian Moretti standing near the bar, appearing calm, appearing present, appearing like a man who had no idea what was happening 2 floors below him. 30 more minutes, Damien said to the room. His second-in-command nodded. And then we move to the building, Damien said. I want to be there when he finds out. What Damien did not know, what no one in that warehouse knew, was that the 4th camera feed, the one covering the service corridor on the building's east side, had been identified by Marco's man 3 hours before the gala and replaced, not removed. Replaced with a feed playing back 40 minutes of earlier, empty corridor footage on a silent loop. The east corridor was not empty. 4 of Cassian's men had been in it for 20 minutes. They were waiting for the doors to open. At 8:22, Cassian's phone buzzed with a message from a number registered to a burner he had given to a contact 2 days ago. A contact who had been watching the waterfront warehouse since 6 o'clock that evening. The message said, "He's moving. ETA 12 minutes. Cassian read it. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked across the ballroom at Marco, who had just returned from the east corridor, and gave a single, small nod. Marco gave it back. Then Cassian looked at the stage, where one of Damien's men had positioned himself 6 feet from the main microphone under the cover of a catering uniform, and understood that the next 12 minutes contained every possible outcome, good and catastrophic, stacked on top of each other like cards. He reached into his jacket. Not for a phone. He thought about Elena, 3 tables away, standing with the foundation director and watching the room with the quiet, peripheral attention of a woman who had spent 14 years learning to read danger before it announced itself. He thought about Vanessa, who was not at the gala, who was sitting in her apartment right now with a phone in her hand, waiting to hear whether the thing she had set in motion in the wrong direction had been redirected in time. He thought about his son. He did not yet know it was a son. He would learn that later. But he thought about the photograph Elena had placed on his desk, that grainy, unmistakable image. And he felt something in his chest that was not strategy, not calculation, not the cold management of variables. It was the thing underneath all of it, the thing that had been there since before the Empire, before the Syndicate, before the walls got too high to see over. The reason any of it was ever supposed to matter. He straightened his jacket. The east corridor door opened, and Damien Voss walked into the building with 4 men at his back and the absolute certainty of a man who has already counted his winnings, stepping into a room that had been waiting for him with the patience of a trap that had been set by someone who had finally, completely, run out of things to lose, except that Damien Voss walked through the east corridor door like a man arriving at his own coronation. He had 4 men with him, not mercenaries, not hired muscle with obvious tells, but the specific kind of professional that expensive criminal organizations produced. Men who moved quietly, dressed correctly, kept their hands at their sides rather than in their pockets because they had been trained that visible restraint communicated more threat than visible readiness. They fanned through the corridor with the practiced ease of a team that had rehearsed the layout. What they had not rehearsed was the 4 men already waiting in it. The first exchange lasted 9 seconds. It was not cinematic. There was no warning, no dialogue, no moment where someone gave someone else a chance to reconsider. Cassian's men had been in position for 20 minutes in the dark of a service corridor that smelled of cleaning products and old carpet. And when the door opened, they moved with the economy of people who had made a decision beforehand and were now simply executing it. 2 of Damien's men went down in the first 4 seconds. One of Cassian's men took a hit to the shoulder that he didn't acknowledge until later, when someone pointed at the blood on his jacket, and he looked surprised. The other 2 of Damien's men were restrained against the corridor wall with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of practice and zero hesitation. Damien himself was the variable. He had stopped the moment the door opened, and the corridor was clearly not empty. He had not reached for anything. He had not run. He had stood completely still with his hands slightly away from his sides, in the manner of a man who has been in enough dangerous rooms to know that the wrong movement in the first 3 seconds is the last movement you make. He looked at the 4 men. He looked at the 2 of his own men on the floor. He processed the information with the speed of someone whose brain had been calibrated by years of high-stakes calculation. Then Marco stepped out of the shadow at the far end of the corridor. "Walk," Marco said. Damien walked. They brought him to a room off the main corridor. Not the ballroom, not the server room, a small conference space the Foundation used for donor meetings, with a long table and 6 chairs and a window that had been covered with a jacket someone had hung over the curtain rod. One of Cassian's men stood at the door. Marco stood to the left. Damien sat down at the table with the bearing of a man who was recalibrating, not defeated. That was the thing about Damien Voss that Cassian had understood from the photograph Marco had put on his desk. He was never not thinking. Even now, contained in a windowless room with 2 of his men on a corridor floor and the evidence of his financial operation assembling itself in a server room 2 floors below, he was calculating the remaining angles. Cassian came in 4 minutes after they sat down. He closed the door behind him. He pulled out the chair across from Damien and sat in it. He did not look at Marco. He looked at Damien. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How far did it get?" Damien said finally. His voice was level. The voice of a man asking a logistical question. "Transfer 17, Cassian said. "All of them are in legal hold, full evidence chain, time-stamped, source authenticated, legally admissible in 6 jurisdictions." Something moved in Damien's face. Very small. A recalculation completing. "The credential was flagged," he said. Not a question. The credential was tracked from the moment it was installed. Vanessa. "Vanessa told me what she knew," Cassian said. "Which wasn't everything, because you're careful, but it was enough." Damien looked at the table. He was quiet for a moment in the manner of a man reviewing a long game and identifying the point where it turned. "She was useful for longer than I expected," he said. "I'll give her that." Cassian felt something move in his jaw. He held it. "She was a person you manipulated for 14 months and then intended to discard the moment she stopped being functional." "So we're half the people in your organization," Damien said. "The difference between us is vocabulary, not method." "The difference between us," Cassian said, "is that this conversation is being recorded and yours is the one that just confessed." A silence. Then Damien leaned back in the chair very slightly, the first physical concession he had made, and looked at Cassian with the expression of a man folding a hand he still believes was correctly played. "What do you want?" he said. "Everything," Cassian said. "Every shell, every contact, every piece of the network you built around mine for 2 years. Names, accounts, the 3 city officials on your payroll, the logistics company at the waterfront. Everything, tonight, in writing, with your signature, witnessed. And if I do that?" "You leave," Cassian said. "Not the city, the country. You have 48 hours to be on a plane. What happens after that is between you and whatever jurisdictions have been watching you, which, based on what my attorney found in the last 72 hours, is at least 4. He paused. "If you don't do it, the evidence chain goes to every law enforcement contact I have, which is a number you would find surprising for someone in my position, and you spend the next decade explaining 17 attempted wire transfers to people who have very little patience for creative accounting." Damien looked at him. "You're not going to kill me," he said. Not with relief, with the flat recognition of a man reading a contract. "No," Cassian said. "I'm not." "That's new." "Yes," Cassian said. "It is." The papers took 40 minutes to produce. Marco had a lawyer on the phone. Damien sat at the conference table and went through them with the methodical attention of a man who was surrendering territory, but intended to understand exactly what he was surrendering, and Cassian sat across from him and waited with the patience of someone who had already decided this was how it ended, and was simply observing the formality of it concluding. At 10:17, Damien signed. He put the pen down. He looked at Cassian one more time. "You know this doesn't change what you are," he said. Cassian picked up the papers. "I know what I am," he said. "I've always known. The question was what I was going to do about it." He stood. He left the room. In the ballroom above, the gala was still running. 240 people eating and donating and talking to each other without any knowledge of what had taken place 40 feet below them. The string quartet was playing something slow and formal. The Foundation's director of operations was giving a speech about community initiatives. The bar was busy. Elena was standing near the back wall. She had been standing there for the last 40 minutes with a glass of water she hadn't drunk, watching the door to the corridor stairwell with the focused attention of a woman who has decided to trust a situation she cannot control and is finding it the hardest thing she has ever chosen to do. When Cassian came through the door, she released a breath that she had been holding, she realized, for most of an hour. He crossed the room, not rushing, not performing composure, just moving toward her with the specific directness of a man who knows exactly where he is going for the first time in a long time. He stopped in front of her. "It's done," he said. She looked at his face. She looked at the way he was standing. Not the boss, not the management of the room, just a man who was very tired and had something he needed to say and didn't know yet if he had the right to say it. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." "Your men?" "One needs a hospital. He'll be fine." She nodded. She looked at the glass in her hand and set it on the table beside her. "I want to go home," she said. "Elena, not to talk tonight, not to resolve anything." She looked at him steadily. "I just want to sleep in my own bed. I'm tired of sleeping somewhere else." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. They left the gala at 10:34. They drove home without speaking, and the silence was not comfortable and was not hostile, and was not the silence of two people who have nothing left to say. It was the silence of two people who have too much to say and understand for once that tonight is not the night for it. Vanessa Cross was arrested at 6:40 the following morning, not by Cassian's men, by two federal agents who had been building a financial crimes case against Damien Voss's network for 11 months, and who had received, 3 days prior, an anonymous package containing documented evidence of the credential installation, the server access, and 14 months of coordinated meetings. The package had been assembled by Cassian's legal team and delivered without his name on any piece of it. Vanessa was taken to a federal processing center. She was released on her own recognizance 8 hours later, after cooperating fully with every question asked, after handing over the secondhand cell phone and the envelope with the server codes and the contact records she had kept, meticulously, in a notes app on her personal phone because she was, underneath everything, a woman who did not trust verbal agreements and had documented everything as insurance. The insurance turned out to be the thing that saved her. Her attorney, the whistleblower specialist she had called from the parking garage, negotiated immunity from the federal wire fraud charges in exchange for complete testimony. The criminal liability for the credential installation was reduced to a civil matter, settled 14 months later with a fine she paid from savings she had built over 8 years of legitimate work. She did not go back to the Moretti Group building. She did not contact Cassian again after the gala, not directly. She left the city 6 weeks after the arrest and moved to a coastal town 3 states away, where she had a cousin and no history and a lease on a small apartment with a second bedroom. She painted yellow before she needed it. Her daughter was born on a Thursday morning in early spring, 8 pounds and furious about it, with a cry that the nurse described as impressively committed. Vanessa held her and did not name her for 3 days, because she wanted to look at her first and understand who she was before deciding what to call her. On the 3rd day, she named her Ada. A week after Ada was born, a letter arrived from an attorney's office. Inside was the paperwork establishing a protected financial trust, funded and irrevocable, in Ada's name. The letter explained that the trust would cover educational costs through graduate school, with a stipend available beginning at age 18. The letter contained no personal message. It was signed by the attorney. Vanessa read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer of the bedside table and looked at Ada in the bassinet and thought about the man who had signed the document he couldn't put his name on, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not gratitude exactly, not absolution, something quieter and more complicated that she thought she would spend the rest of her life finding the right language for. She did not try to contact him. She understood, in the way you understand things you didn't earn the right to hope for, that the trust was not an invitation. It was a closed door held open just enough to let the light through for a child who had not chosen any of the circumstances of her arrival. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for her, and she would never be able to say so. The dismantling of the Moretti Syndicate's violent operations took 14 months. It was not dramatic. It did not happen in a single decision or a boardroom speech or a moment of visible transformation. It happened the way most real changes happen, incrementally, painfully, with setbacks and resistance and long stretches, where it seemed like the thing was too embedded to uproot without destroying the entire structure. Ricci left the organization in the third month, taking Fontaine with him. They established their own operation in the Eastern Territories that lasted 8 months before collapsing under the weight of its own mismanagement. 2 of the other captains followed shortly after. 3 stayed. The 3 who stayed were the ones who had been, even in the old structure, running things that could survive the transition: property management, logistics, 2 restaurants that had always operated legitimately and had simply been laundering ancillary funds on the side. Strip away the laundering, install proper accounting, bring in a compliance firm. It was work, but it was work that had an endpoint. Marco oversaw most of it. He was not happy about all of it. He said so, multiple times, in the direct and non-theatrical way that was his characteristic mode. He told Cassian that what they were building was going to be half as profitable for the foreseeable future. He told him that several of their long-standing arrangements would dissolve when the protective arm of the organization disappeared. He told him that being legitimate meant being subject to regulations that were specifically designed to be difficult. Cassian said he understood. Marco looked at him for a long moment and then said, "You actually do, don't you?" "Yes." "This is because of her." "It's because of a lot of things," Cassian said. "She's one of them. She's the biggest one." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's good." "I know that." "You should have known it 14 years ago and kept knowing it without requiring a catastrophe to remind you." "Yes," Cassian said. "I should have." Marco picked up his jacket. "I'll have the compliance firm contact in your office by Thursday." He left. Cassian sat alone in his office, the same office where this had all begun, though he had moved the furniture since then, rearranged it so that the desk no longer faced the door with the authority of a throne, but sat at an angle, more like a workspace and less like a declaration, and looked at the city through the window. He had looked at this city for years as something to be managed, to be controlled, to be held, the way you hold something you're afraid of losing. He looked at it now and felt only how much of it he had never actually seen. Elena went back to work 7 months into her pregnancy. Not to the Moretti Foundation, not to the social calendar of Mrs. Cassian Moretti. She enrolled in a continuing education program at the architecture school. She had attended 20 years ago and sat in a studio with people 20 years younger than her and drew things for the first time in a decade and found that the skill was still there, dusty and stiff like a muscle that had been resting too long but not lost. Her professor, a woman in her 60s with strong opinions about load-bearing walls, told her after the 3rd session that she had good instincts. Elena had not cried in a school bathroom since she was 4. She cried in the bathroom of the architecture school at 38, not from sadness, but from the specific, overwhelming relief of being told that something she had set aside still existed, that she had not, in the years of managing Cassian's world, misplaced herself completely. She came home that evening and told him about it. He listened. He did not offer opinions. He asked 3 questions: what the professor had said, what the project was, whether she was enjoying it, and she answered all 3 and watched his face as he listened and saw in it the man she had married before the empire and the walls, the man who had told a 20-year-old hotel receptionist that she was smarter than her job. She had not told him she'd forgiven him. She hadn't. It was not that simple, and she was not going to pretend it was for the sake of a clean resolution. What had happened between them could not be unhappened. The pregnancy she had carried alone through 3 weeks of planning and a missed anniversary dinner and 4 days at her sister's house. The name Vanessa Cross, which would always exist in the space between them, not as a wound exactly, but as a permanent alteration of the landscape. The years of her own disappearance, which had not been entirely his fault, and not entirely her own, and had been, like most of the damage in long marriages, the product of 2 people who were not paying close enough attention until the cost of inattention became impossible to ignore. They had been in couples counseling since the month after the gala. A therapist named Dr. Reyes, who had an office that smelled of coffee and bookshelves, and who had, in their first session, looked at both of them with complete even-handedness and said, "I'm not here to save your marriage. I'm here to help you figure out whether it's worth saving, and if it is, what saving it actually requires. Elena had liked her immediately. The sessions were not easy. That was what she told Diane when Diane asked, in the careful way of a sister who wanted information without causing pain. They were not easy, and they were not fast, and there were weeks when she left Dr. Reyes's office feeling worse than when she'd arrived, hollowed out by the specific exhaustion of examining things you have spent years not examining. But she kept going, and Cassian kept going. That was the thing she had not fully anticipated, that he would show up. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, not without the occasional retreat into the old patterns of silence and management. But he showed up. He sat across from Dr. Reyes and talked about things that cost him something to say. He talked about his father, which he had never done in 14 years of marriage. He talked about what control meant to him and why he had needed it and what it had taken from him to hold it for so long. He talked about the night of the anniversary dinner. He said, "I had the thing I needed to tell her right there, in my chest, and I answered the phone instead. Because dealing with a crisis I understood felt safer than saying a true thing to a person I was terrified of losing." Elena had looked at the carpet during that part. Dr. Reyes had let the room sit with it. That was 3 months before their son was born. Lucian Moretti arrived on a Wednesday in late autumn, 7 hours of labor that Elena described afterward as the most physically painful and most clarifying experience of her adult life, which she said in the specific tone of a woman who is still processing both of those things simultaneously. I was 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Elena's forehead and Cassian's ears and an expression of profound skepticism that both of them agreed was his own from the first moment. Cassian was in the room. He had been there for the full 7 hours, which he had not left, not for a call, not for a message, not for anything. His phone was in his jacket pocket in the closet of the hospital room, and he had not looked at it once. When Lucian arrived and the nurse placed him in Elena's arms, Cassian stood beside the bed and looked at his son with an expression that Elena, who was looking at him sideways in the first haze of relief and exhaustion, had never seen on his face before. Not strength, not control, not the managed composure that had been his default setting for as long as she'd known him. Something open, something that didn't cost him to show. He put one hand very carefully on Lucian's head. The baby's head was smaller than his palm. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "Hey," barely above a whisper, to the baby. Just that. Elena watched him say it and felt something in her chest shift. Not heal, not close, but move. Like a stone that has been sitting in one place for a very long time, finally settling into a slightly different position. Still there, still heavy, but different. She did not tell him she forgave him that day. She told him 7 weeks later, on a night when Lucian was asleep in the room down the hall, and the house was quiet in the way that houses with newborns are quiet. A provisional, listening quiet, always waiting for the sound that means someone needs something. She told him in the kitchen. They were both standing at the counter, which was where they ended up having most of their real conversations now, the kitchen at 10 at night with the good light on. The two of them leaning against the counter the way people do when they're not performing a conversation, but actually having one. She said, "I need you to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's fine. It's not fine. What happened, all of it, is not something I am going to reframe into a story where it didn't hurt." "I know," he said. "But I'm choosing to be here," she said. "Not because I have to. Not because of Lucian, though he's part of it. Because I looked at everything, the whole 14 years, the real parts and the broken parts. And I decided that the man you're trying to become is someone I want to know." She looked at him directly. "That's what I have. That's what I can offer right now." He didn't reach for her. He didn't move. He just looked at her with the steadiness of someone receiving something they had not been certain they would ever receive and was not going to handle carelessly. "That's everything," he said. She nodded once. She picked up her tea. She walked to the window. He stood where he was and let her have the distance because he had learned, finally, what distance sometimes meant. Not abandonment, not withdrawal, just a person claiming the space they needed to exist fully in a room. The Moretti Group continued its transformation through the following year. The organization Cassian rebuilt was smaller, quieter, profitable in the way that legitimate businesses are profitable, slowly, through actual service, without the artificial acceleration of money that doesn't officially exist. Two of the properties they sold. One of the restaurants expanded. A real estate development arm, dormant for years because it had always been a secondary consideration to the criminal operations, was activated and staffed with people who had actual credentials. Marco ran the day-to-day. Cassian took a step back from operations. Not fully, not immediately, but progressively. By the end of the second year, he was attending 3 meetings a week rather than 12. He was home for dinner most nights. He argued once for 40 minutes with a contractor about the renovation of their kitchen, and Elena stood in the doorway listening to it and felt something that she recognized after a moment as happiness. Not the consuming, uncomplicated happiness of people who have not been through anything, but the particular kind that exists on the other side of damage, earned, specific, aware of its own fragility. The legal restructuring of Damien Voss's network took 2 years to complete in the courts. Damien himself had left the country within the 48 hours Cassian had given him. He was arrested in a third country 14 months later, on charges that had nothing to do with the gala. Financial crimes that had been accumulating for a decade, finally reaching the critical mass that makes prosecution unavoidable. He was extradited. He spent the better part of the following years in various stages of legal proceedings that Cassian followed in the news, with the minimal attention of a man who has already extracted what he needed from an experience and has moved past it. Theodore Prine surrendered his law license voluntarily in lieu of disbarment proceedings. He opened a bookshop in a coastal town that turned a modest profit and required exactly none of the skills that had made him dangerous. Richie died of a heart attack in the 3rd year. He was 61. Cassian sent flowers to the family. Not as a statement. Just because Richie had been, for a long time, a complicated and not entirely dishonest man, and the flowers seemed like the right thing to do. On a Sunday morning in the 3rd spring after the gala, Cassian and Elena stood on the balcony of their home. Lucian was inside, asleep in his room for another 20 minutes before he would wake with the full-throated urgency of a person for whom every morning is an emergency. He was 2.5 years old and had strong opinions about shoes, arbitrary positions on breakfast foods, and an attachment to a specific blue blanket that had been washed so many times it had lost its original color and become a kind of memory of itself. The city was below them, beginning its morning. Elena had her coffee. Cassian had his hands on the railing. The light was the particular quality of early spring in a city, thin and new and not quite warm enough, but trying. She looked at him sideways in the way she had developed over the last 2 years of standing beside him in rooms and relearning who he was without the armor on. "What are you thinking about?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "A long time ago," he said, "I thought the point of all of it was the winning, building something that nobody could take away, being the person nobody could touch." She waited. "I understand now that I was building the wrong thing," he said. "That all the years I spent making myself untouchable, I was making myself unreachable, and that those are different things, but I treated them like they were the same." The city moved below them. A bus. Someone walking a dog. The ordinary, ongoing motion of a world that does not pause for anyone's understanding, which is perhaps the most honest thing about it. "Are you happy?" Elena said. He turned and looked at her. Not quickly. He took the question seriously, the way he had learned to take things seriously that used to seem too small for his attention. "I don't know if happy is the right word," he said. "I feel—" He stopped, found it. "Present. I feel present. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actually in the room I'm in." She considered that. "That's a good start," she said. From inside the house came the sound of Lucian waking, the specific escalating sequence of a toddler moving from sleep to full communicative presence in under 30 seconds, which was one of his more impressive skills. Elena turned toward the door. Cassian caught her hand. Not dramatically, not with any of the language of grand gestures, just his hand closing around hers for a moment, the weight of it, the warmth, the specific texture of a person who has been beside you for a very long time and has not finally, despite everything, been lost. She looked at their hands, then she looked at him. "Come on," she said. "He's awake." They went inside together. The balcony was empty. The city spread below it, enormous and indifferent and full of people living their complicated, imperfect, irreplaceable lives. The morning light kept coming, the way it always did, without asking whether anyone was ready for it. Inside, Lucian's voice was loud and specific and entirely present, demanding an audience for whatever urgent thing the morning had already produced. And his father was coming down the hall, and his mother was already at the door, and the house was full of the sound of a family doing the ordinary, difficult, necessary work of remaining one. That was the whole of it. Not a triumph, not a clean ending, not the story anyone would have written for themselves from the beginning. Just the truth of what survived, and the choice, made again each morning, to show up for it.